We're really excited to have everybody here. I think we're all on the call really passionate about OSDP and secure channel, and it's pretty exciting to see there's a few hundred of you that have registered and that are joining in. So a pretty impactful thing to see that the industry is finally ready to go OSDP secure channel, and you're looking for more information. So we're all grateful for that. My goal, I'll probably say this 10,000 times. I hope people go OSDP secure channel 100% of the time, especially after you see how simple things are after this presentation. So just a few housekeeping things. We have the chat turned off just so we don't get distracted with chat, but there is a Q&A that you should all be able to submit your questions to. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll try to answer those at the end. We'll try to keep the session about 45 minutes and then we'll do 15 or so minutes after for Q&A. So you can see who's on the call in terms of organizations or companies, and then our panelists on the call. There's me, I'm Jeremy Fromm, I'm with Mercury Security. I've been in the industry for a long time. There's Sal D'Agostino, he's the founder of IDmachines. He's really involved with the OSDP specification. He runs the OSDP Verified program. He's a part of the technical subcommittee for OSDP. So when you want deep technical knowledge or you want training through something like OSDP Bootcamp, Sal is a great resource for that. Mark Schweitzer, he's with Convergint. He's manager of solution strategies. So he's in the field. He knows how to wire this stuff. He knows what technicians are facing. He's going to be a great resource because I'm a lot of theory saying this is how it should work. And then Mark actually knows what works and he can keep all of us honest. And then Jacob Leroy, he's a sales and biz dev manager with Cypress. And if you're not familiar with Cypress, they do some really amazing things with tools for OSDP and testing capabilities with an OSDP cable tester, but they also have tons of other devices for like cable or protocol converters and so forth. And I'll allow some of those guys to share that. So let's get kicked off. This is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to just start with a very general overview of OSDP and some of the terminology that you may hear. And then we're going to focus on how do we connect OSDP devices and how do we use secure channel and what are the gotchas that we see people run into in the field. We'll switch and then we'll focus specifically on secure channel and best practices for deploying secure channel in the field. There's some really critical pieces if we want to deploy this in a cyber secure way, and I don't think that happens enough. So we're going to break down some of those barriers and share best practices. And then we're going to go into some demonstrations and show a little bit under the hood. It's going to get very technical, but we'll show what some of those OSDP packets look like and what they mean and how you could use those to better yourself in the future. So, and then we'll open it up for questions. So, what is OSDP? And I'll start with this, and then Jacob, I'm going to toss it over to you for terminology. So I'll say a few things like peripheral device or PD or access control unit or ACU. You're going to hear us talking about a lot of terminology, secure channel, and Jacob's going to define a few of those. We're going to have a cheat sheet that we're going to send out to everybody after the fact as well. So you'll have that to walk away with. But OSDP, Open Supervised Device Protocol, it's a two-way communication protocol for what we traditionally see as an access control panel and a reader, but it could be so much more. And that's where the access control unit comes into play and the peripheral device comes into play, because it doesn't have to be a panel or a controller and a reader. It could be other things. But OSDP is going to be communication between those two devices. If we're using secure channel, then we can have that communication or data be encrypted. But OSDP gives additional functionality just out of or outside of supervision and tamper and those heavy security things. There's a lot of efficiencies that it provides as well. For example, we can push large packets of data. So if we needed to update a peripheral device or update a reader in the field, we could push that from a centralized location and save you a ton of time and energy, where today you're probably going step or one by one sneaker net style from reader to reader. So we'll talk about all of that, but that's a high level overview. Jacob, other terminology. I said ACU, I said PD, I said secure channel. What are the common things that we're talking about when we're talking OSDP?
Yeah, so PD, peripheral device, the reader, the any other device at the end of the line, that's and ACU, the access control unit. Those are I think the most common OSDP terms we run into. But just to get into the communication terms, we have unencrypted communication. So that's your non-secure communication, which you use for testing and setup. And then we get into secure channel communication, which is using the OSDP secure channel protocol, which is encrypted with the keys. And those keys are technically referred to as the secure channel base key, or SCBK. And those are the keys that are loaded independently into the controller and the reader device. And then so, they each have those and then can sync up when they're on the line and powered on. And then we also have some other stuff like home run systems, like a system topology where you have one reader home run to one panel port. We have multi-drop systems where you have one line with multiple peripheral devices on it, all run back to one port on the ACU. Other things like supervision. So, in OSDP terms, the ACU is constantly polling the PDs, and so that provides a supervised connection because there's that constant back and forth communication. So those are some of the things we'll touch on today throughout the presentation.
Perfect. And then OSDP, it's an international standard, right, Sal? So what does that mean, and why is that important?
Right. So thanks everybody, and really happy to be on the call today. So it is important that people recognize that OSDP, which has been around for a long time, is recognized as an international standard, and that's the geeky ISO IEC number. It happens to be 6083911, also covers a lot of access control technologies. People may also be familiar with ONVIF, which is also sitting in that area. OSDP's evolved over time, right? It sort of started back in the early 2000s. SIA got its hands on it. Actually, the initial people who were involved in it was Mercury and HID when they weren't the same company in Linnell, because there were other ways of communicating securely, but everybody was doing their own. And obviously, from a reader perspective, if you had to adopt every controller's way of doing things, or a controller perspective, you had to adopt every reader's way of doing everything. That interoperability was difficult. So that's part of the raison d'etre as to why that took place. The standard has evolved, and there's actually a handout that'll show you how it's gone from numbers in the ones to numbers in the two, and then the handout shows you the difference from what's 2.15 to 2.17 to 2.2, and OSDP 2.2 is actually the version which is in the ISO standard. The Security Industry Association is actually a standards development organization under the American National Standards Institute. And in the OSDP technical subcommittee, which is open to all, by the way. And if you are interested in that, you can reach out to Cameron Walker Miller at SIA, and you can participate. And I strongly encourage that. So that was where we gained a lot of cachet. And then once it achieved that recognition as an international standard, that's also when we started the OSDP Verified program. The current rev of the standard is 222, and at the end of this quarter, it's scheduled to go to 2.3. So it's an international standard. International standards don't update quite as quickly as the technical subcommittee updates them. So it's important if you're working with the standard, to be on the latest version. Also, if you're a SIA member, it's $50 from SIA, as opposed to several hundred Swiss francs if you go to ISO. It's great that it's an international standard. It gives it a lot of cachet.
Well,
Eventually, the ISO standard will catch up. But yeah, it's. I mean, it just shows you that it's globally recognized, and there'll be some more examples of how that's playing out. So thanks, Jeremy.
Sal, I think one of the important things there, and you touched on it, is the interoperability piece. Like how frustrating would it be if you bought a reader and you bought an access control panel and you wanted encrypted communication, but they weren't interoperable? This takes all of the challenge out of that, and it makes it so you can pick whether it's an HID reader or a wavelengths reader, a Legion reader, or a Farpoint reader, and you can talk the same language regardless of what manufacturer you're picking. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for me, is it gives choice for end users. I think is a nice thing. So
Yeah,
okay,
I
so
mean,
let's
and it standardizes the kind of encryption, right? So yeah, many things about that make the fact that it's a standard help to achieve operational and business goals.
Yeah, so I want to go around the horn, and we need to keep this somewhat quick, but I want to know everyone's perspective on OSDP. What's the one key thing that is most important for you, or the biggest thing that you see today with OSDP? And I'll start, and what I'll say is I've been talking OSDP and trying to convince people to migrate to the OSDP standard since 2014, I think. I really got into it. And it's just now that I'm seeing it really take off. And so 11, 12 years, and we're just seeing this. So again, I'll say it again, we should be using OSDP secure channel 100% of the time. And that's my perspective on the market. Jacob, what do you got?
Yeah, so when we first launched some of our OSDP products back in like 2015, 2016, it was kind of like its own product group, and we saw interest from large institutions, large financial institutions, very large corporations, government. But now we're starting to see, in 2025, throughout my travels and talking to customers, I'm starting to see more interest with just more small projects and just more interest in general. And so I think now the technology has matured over the last decade, and now we're starting to get some second gen products out there from the manufacturers, and most of the manufacturers have OSDP products that they offer, as opposed to 10 years ago where that was not the case.
Yeah, I think that was a big gap in the past, is you would buy a reader that supported OSDP and then your controller didn't. So you're like, well, I can't use it. And now we're finally to the point where everybody just supports it in their software, hardware, and it makes it a lot easier. Mark, how about you? You're on mute, Mark.
Mute needs to come off for that to work.
Yeah.
So I was going to echo some of your perspectives. To me, there's, as an integrator and as trying to advise our customers, being the customer's expert that they rely on, security is extremely important. We've seen, you can see maybe not as fancy as some of the credential attacks, but there still are easy ways to intercept and duplicate weakened or playback weakened communications to allow yourself access into a facility using that, or getting credential information. The big part for us has to do with serviceability and cost. So while the installation of OSDP and the OSDP cabling is a little more expensive, being able to get the bidirectional data from the reader to the panel, as well as, and this is the part we're still just seeing this in its infancy, of getting bidirectional data, being able to change reader configuration or update reader firmware with variations from different manufacturers and stuff. Those are killer for us, because in the past, a perfect example is I also do a lot with mobile credentials, right? And there's your twin on the HID side who does a bunch of wallet and mobile stuff, Phil Coppola. So every one of your when you're going to change, assuming the reader supports mobile, in most cases, you have to go out and touch every one of those readers with an app to update its configuration to support the new encryption keys and other configuration changes. Well, if I can sit there at a central location, and we do have a couple of manufacturer partners we work with now where I can actually go into the software interface of the access control software and update reader configurations remotely to turn on that, change keys. That's, to me, is extremely important, because now it costs less than sending a technician out there and having to update the individual readers. And the other thing now that we're seeing that's related is also serviceability. We're now able to get certain levels of diagnostic information because it's a bi-directional type of communication, right? In the past, if a Wiegand reader stopped working and stopped transmitting data, you would never know it. Where with OSDP, you'll actually get an indication of that. So I know from, if I've got a customer that says, oh, well, I put the card against the reader, we're not seeing a transaction in the access control system. We can go into that, say, oh, that reader, the OSDP side of that reader is offline. We now know, we have a better idea of troubleshooting, and we can ensure we have the right technician with the right parts on site to troubleshoot it and reduce the amount of time that particular door is offline.
Yeah, and you said it. So I think one of the resistance pieces is there's this belief that OSDP is going to add costs to projects and add costs to deployment. But in the end, I think OSDP saves you so much time. And as we need to focus more about cyber things, as we are behaving more like an IoT device on the network, we have to have efficient ways of sending commands down or sending firmware updates down or configuration changes down. And OSDP enables us to do that at scale, where we couldn't do that at scale with Wiegand. So, okay, good. Sal, how about you? Perspective on the market?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to probably touch on this later in the presentation, but I think one of the things that's really struck me is like the increasing rate of adoption and companies from all over the world, some of whom, as someone who likes to think, got a finger on the pulse of the industry, companies I've never heard of before suddenly are coming over and saying, hey, we want to get our products OSDP verified. So yeah, I mean, and the fact that I don't, it's no longer pushing a string, right, or pulling teeth, whatever analogy you want to use. I don't think you have to convince people that, you should, stealing from our next slide, that you shouldn't be using Wiegand and that you shouldn't be using insecure methods.
So let's go. Let's talk about that. So this is the third time now. 100% of the time we should be using secure channel. Tell us, there's different profiles within OSDP. There was ways of using OSDP, so you get two-way communication and tamper, but it wasn't encrypted. We're saying we should use OSDP secure channel, the encrypted version, all the time. What is happening within the specification to help push us that way?
So basically, basic is no longer a profile, right? So when there is a point when you're communicating in the clear, but that is what you need. You need to be in the clear before you set up secure channel. And there are a couple of communications commands that are allowed in the clear, but those are all part of the secure profile. So OSDP has multiple profiles. It had a basic profile, and that basic profile has now been deprecated. From an OSDP verified program perspective, we've never verified anybody to the basic profile, nor do we accept any applications for the basic profile. Besides the secure profile, there are a couple of biometrics profiles and there are a couple of smart card profiles as well, but all of those are secure profiles. And so when it comes to OSDP profiles, there are variants of secure profiles, and there's no other rational way to implement this protocol. That doesn't mean that someone couldn't implement it without secure channel, but the whole point of this webinar and session today is to say there's no reason for you not to do that. It's not that hard. We'll show you how. There's lots of tools to be able to do that. All products that are out there in the marketplace that are supporting OSDP support the secure method. So if someone says, "Hey, I want to implement BASIC," you have to take them to the woodshed, frankly.
Say no. It's funny. I've heard recently, actually a couple of times from end users, and they've said, "Jeremy, I'm going OSDP. I bought readers that support it. I got new controllers that support it. I used OSDP cable." And I was like, "That's amazing. What drove you that way?" And they said, "Because we want to push firmware to our readers." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's a good reason, but you care about security too." And they go, "Oh no, that secure channel thing is too hard. I'm not going to turn that on." And I was like, whoa, my mouth dropped. And I was like, it's not hard. It's probably just a checkbox. And you should turn OSDP secure channel on and get your firmware capabilities. So yeah, if you're on the call and you're trying to use OSDP without the encryption, I think you should take a look at that and always use encryption. So
yeah, there's no downgrade in functionality or performance when you're using the secure channel profile. So, and that's really important.
Yep.
And then OSDP Verified is a program that we helped establish with SIA over 5 years ago. There's over 20 brands, 10 different countries. Here's the NASCAR of all the logos that are out there, and more in the works, right? Let's see, there's US, UK, France, Germany, Sweden, Finland, New Zealand, South Korea, Ukraine, Israel, India, and Switzerland are in process, and more underway. All of these companies support the secure profile, right? All of these companies are OSDP verified. And there have been some brickbats thrown at OSDP in Black Hat and other presentations over time. And if you actually go, so one of the presentations from a Black Hat conference was talking about the OSDP walk of shame, where they're talking about different ways that you could attack OSDP. Almost all of those attacks were the result of improper implementations, right? And none of those attacks would be an OSDP verified implementation. And it was actually a 170 slide presentation. But if you went to slide 166 in the conclusions of that presentation, the hacker said, "Oh, the way to not get hacked is to be OSDP verified." So that's a shameless plug.
It wasn't a problem with the specification. It was a problem with the deployment or the implementation. So Jacob, when we were chatting earlier, you mentioned something and it kind of stuck out to me about this. Do you remember what you said?
I believe so. Yeah, about most brands having OSDP options.
Yeah, you pretty much have every option you could want, right? And this is what I was saying, is there's that interoperability there. So whatever hardware or software solution you pick, you can use OSDP and you're not limited in that aspect. So, okay, good. Let's.
I mean, there's one point I'd make about that is also check to make sure that your access control system actually is also supporting OSDP as well, right? Because there's still some use of manufacturer-specific commands. Some of the access control software vendors still, while they may have OSDP verified components, push them to see whether or not they're actually OSDP verified as well.
Yeah, 100%. So
Thanks,
let's shift gears and let's talk about how do we specify OSDP? How do we design OSDP systems? So Jacob, could you talk about what's best practices and how we design these things? There's all these components, but what should people be doing in the field?
Well, first you got to pick your reader and your controller, and then make sure those are OSDP verified, and then like Sal was saying, make sure your software platform supports OSDP and it supports a lot of those features that you're looking for with OSDP. But also you need to look at the cable at these sites too. If you're working in existing buildings, it's got existing cable, and that may or may not be suitable for the new OSDP protocol. But I think you can use it more often than you might think, and there's tools out there to help you test it. I think you did a video, Cypress has a cable test tool. Jeremy did a video on it, and he liked it. So there's those types of tools. You got to look at the cable. There's other tools as well, tools for configuring OSDP devices outside of the access control software, and those tools, are handheld or battery powered to make it simple. So you don't have to get something, you don't have to take the reader back to the panel. You don't have to open up a laptop, open the software, and then connect a reader to your laptop to configure it. And then also just some troubleshooting tools you might want to have on hand as well, something's going to go wrong at some point, inevitably, in every installation, and then you just need those tools on hand to be able to address those issues and identify those issues.
Yeah, the tools will allow you to see the data and make decisions based on what you see versus guessing. The other piece that I'll point out on here is, and Sal just talked about it, but use OSDP verified products, because we know that they've been designed in a way that meet the specification, and they're not going rogue and trying to do their own little thing. And it will save you so many headaches if you use OSDP verified solutions. And if you're on the call, if you're a manufacturer, and if you haven't gone OSDP verified, then you should get on the list, and we should make sure that you're creating your integration so it meets the spec. So Sal touched on this a little bit. I'll mention it a little bit more, but in order for these different functions and features to work, then all three components, they need to support OSDP in that feature. So for example, if you want to go secure channel and you have a peripheral device, a reader, it supports secure channel, let's say. And then you have a controller, an ACU, and it supports secure channel. We're good. But the software is outdated and it doesn't have an option for secure channel. Well, not all three things align. You can't use secure channel at that point. And we're going to see on the next slide a lot of the different capabilities of OSDP. And this is going to be true for all of those capabilities. So if you want to use OSDP multi-drop, a really cool thing for architecture thing, like deployment on how you architect a system, the reader and the controller may support, but the software may not support it. So you want to ask and you want to ensure that all of these things align. Sal, you were going to mention something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as an example, you can have controllers and readers that support secure channel, but if the access control software doesn't know how to manage those keys properly, then you're not all the way there, right? So you really want to make sure that you've got that all of these things supporting all that functionality, right? Just a little, at this point in time, file transfer is optional. So there could be an OSDP verified product that is verified, but it doesn't support file transfer. So you'd want to make sure that both your readers and your controllers support file transfer. If you go to the OSDP verified site, there's a tick box that says file transfer, just in case you want to, check that out. So make sure that the features and functionalities that you're looking for are supported all the way through.
Yeah, and these are some of the features and functionality that are capable with OSDP. So the readers or the peripheral devices, LED or buzzer, that's controlled through OSDP messages. When you get tamper messages, if somebody pulls that device off the wall, if there's a tamper on that device, you would get a tamper message. If you have an LCD screen that has text on it, or the capability of writing text, you could send OSDP messages that have text. So maybe in the morning, it says, "Good morning, Jeremy. You are a fantastic employee." That could work, but all three things need to support that, right? The software needs to give you capability of doing that, and you need a reader that supports text. Sal, what else do you want to add on this?
No, I like LEDs are a good one, right? So you can support, red and green typically is the basic LEDs. You put them on both at the same time, you sort of get amber. Some people like blue, right? But you'd need to have a tricolor LED in order to be able to support that. I've mentioned file transfer. I think that's an important one. And also supporting IO, right? So a reader could have IO, but there's also like right now there are OSDP IO modules, right? And so rather than having to run a discrete line and opto-isolated line for every IO, you can handle 16 lines of IO over the same 4 wires that you use to communicate OSDP, right? And and OSDP has 4 wires, right? There's TX plus and TX minus, which is the serial signal communications, and then power and ground. That's all you need for all this stuff. You don't need that big bundle anymore.
Yep, that makes it a lot easier to wire for sure.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to just jump in on that last slide there for a second. All of these features that the peripheral device supports are handled or reported to the access control unit and the capabilities report, which is part of the handshake when the reader, or sorry, the PD and the ACU start communicating. And we'll get into that later in the presentation, but I just wanted to note that, if the manufacturer publishes that capabilities report, or if you have the device, and you have the IDmachines IDOLA to look at the communication, then you can verify all that for yourself. But we'll show you some more concrete examples about that later in the presentation.
So Sal talked a little bit about the IO and some of the things maybe outside for the peripheral devices, outside of your traditional reader. So Jacob, actually, let's start with Mark. Mark, how does this impact what you see in the field? How does it impact an integrator? If you're putting in a device that supports OSDP that's not a reader, how does that impact the way you design or the way you deploy?
So the probably the single biggest thing is as we mentioned, especially if you're able to do multi-drop, you're now running 1 pair of wires, 2 pairs of wires out there, one for power and one for the OSDP signal. And instead of the big yellow banana cable that's as big as my thumb, that's $800 for 1,000 feet or whatever it is today, and for the customer it's usually more than that. That's my price. Anyway, but yeah, so as an integrator, we're able to use less cabling. We can use IO boards to leverage that as well. I can still remember an anecdotal example of we had, and this is also really good actually, if the specification or the customer need changes in the future, by having that IO board out there. So in the past, I've done some large data center jobs where the standard cable that we actually had specified had not just the normal 4 elements you'd have in a hybrid cable of the door lock, a reader cable, an IO for the Rex and an IO for the door contact, but we had several other cables in there because they wanted a sound. They might want a sounder. They might want so at the end of the day, though, with OSDP and the ability to use an IO board, all that goes away. I just have to put the IO board out there in the field to be able to manage that IO. And if the customer need changes, well, I'm just going to not use that function on the IO board. If I'm not going to use a sounder, I don't have to do it, rather than pulling this either monster cable, because usually once the installation's done, repulling cabling is a big challenge. And then the other thing, what I was going to mention is this opens up, and we're just seeing it now with the ability to add IO. Besides an IO board, this also opens up to the ability to use to offer an all-in-one sort of lock set device, whether it's based on the reader and then the reader can power the strike, or the reader can trigger the strike independently. Or what I'm kind of excited to hopefully see in the future is, right now you've got some companies that make PoE locks. Well, what if I don't need to extend the network all the way out to the door, which creates a number of security and communications problems. Now I can use the same, it's actually a less expensive chipset to provide that same functionality at the reader level, because now I'm using the OSDP serial communications versus having to have a full network stack living at the door. So less complicated and easier to maintain. And again, for us, that goes back to efficiency. It's faster to install, again, more flexible and Again, OSDP cable by itself might be more expensive, but when I'm not having to pull out 4 other cables to go with that OSDP cable, my overall cabling cost might actually drop.
Yeah.
And then,
Really good point, right? Because we talk about how OSDP cable might be a little bit more, but not if you're talking about a big bundle.
Yeah. And overall cost long term is going to be less. The ability to interact with these devices and changing the experience of wiring a door and what's needed. I think OSDP changes a lot for us here. So this is kind of exciting stuff. Jacob, there's a Cypress device there. Can you explain what that specific device is and add any other thoughts?
Yeah. So as Mark mentioned, there are OSDP enabled IO boards out there on the market to help facilitate the IO transfer between some of the peripheral devices around the door, but not all of the ACUs currently support an IO type device. So Cypress has a device we call an IO extender, and it allows you to connect the relay outputs and other physical outputs that are still on the access control panel itself out to the door and connect those back out to like a rec switch, a door strike, door position sensor. But we do that with our devices. We send those signals over the existing OSDP data signals without interrupting the OSDP communication. So you can still run your OSDP cable with just your 2 pairs of wires and get all that IO functionality without having to run that additional cable.
Yeah, that's huge. Cool. All right, so that's OSDP and how to design and some information about the spec itself. Let's switch to retrofitting, because I'm guessing that most of the people on the call probably have at least one Wiegand reader installed at their facility, or they've installed a few in the past. So I don't know what the exact number is. I think it's a pretty high number of Wiegand to OSDP ratio, probably 90+% would be my guess. And I would guess maybe even higher than 90%, but there's a lot of Wiegand out there. So Jacob, what is needed to start this retrofit? Am I having to rip out the reader, rip out the cable, rip out the controller, start all over, build me a brand new system, or are there other options?
There are definitely other options. There's options to reuse or continue to use the existing Wiegand system and just replace the readers. On the slide here, we show one of the Cypress converters. And what this does is allows, customers to purchase new OSDP readers. They get the latest and greatest of the reader technology. They run the OSDP line data and power back to the panel. And then at the panel, the OSDP connects to our converter board, and we break that out to the traditional Wiegand data 1, data 0 out, and then all the IO like LED, buzzer, tamper, and that other kind of stuff. And then you can connect that to your traditional Wiegand port on the panel. So you can get the benefits of OSDP. You can get longer ranges. You can reuse the existing cable. You can get the OSDP secure channel security, but without having to rip and replace the entire system.
Yeah. And on the reader side, I would say that a lot of readers out there, they're capable of doing OSDP or Wiegand, and most of them are just programmed to talk Wiegand. So in those cases, you don't even need to touch your reader either. It's just a configuration change to say talk OSDP now.
Right.
So it's not, I think is where we say it's not as scary as it used to be. It's not a full rip and replace of a system. You can reuse a lot of what's out there.
Yeah, and then additionally, even if you're looking at putting in new OSDP readers and new OSDP panels, ACUs, but you still have all that cable in there. And a lot of times you can use that existing cable, especially at existing sites where, you already have home run cable configuration set up. You already have a reader to door with its own cable going back to the panel, and it might be an 18.6 or a 22.6. But if it was used for Wiegand, it's not going very far, and at lower baud rates, it can a lot of times handle OSDP, and that's what that cable test tool that Cypress developed is for. It's for you guys to get out there and make sure that cable will work with OSDP. When it won't work with OSDP, it might work with OSDP at 9600 baud at the lower baud rates, but if you start to get up to higher baud rates, then maybe it falls apart. But if that's not something you need for that particular job, if you're not using any functionality that needs that higher baud rate, like file transfer or like biometric or anything that has like higher data rates, then you're good.
Okay, good. And I'm looking at time, so I'm going to move us along. So let's talk about the cable mark. So I think we've said a bunch of times that we can reuse most Wiegand wiring in a lot of applications. For new installations, what does a true OSDP compliant cable look like?
So we kind of very handily listed the requirements there on the slide, but essentially it's going to be a twisted pair with low impedance, low capacitance, and which is what makes it different than, and this is where I always sort of, when I'm talking with people about speccing or getting cabling, that is different than just getting like and it's shielded, of course. This is different than just getting like a typical shielded twisted pair cable that you would use for, say, well, perfect example is the existing shielded twisted pair cable you're using for your Wiegand reader because of that lower impedance capacitance, that 120 ohm requirement. So it is a separate cable, which does mean it's a little bit more expensive than the standard cable. As Jacob and we've already kind of talked a little bit at a high level. In many cases, if your needs are really basic, you'll be able to get along just fine reusing your existing Wiegand cable. That's not what ideally you want to see, but from a cost standpoint, it just makes a lot more sense to get in there and be able to take all the other advantages of the OSDP without necessarily needing to go down the rabbit hole of pulling cable, because that repulling new cable becomes expensive. So.
Yeah. And if we look at the graph there, over on the right, you see what clean data looks like. And on the left, you see what messy data looks like. I joke, my line is I say you can run OSDP over a wet shoelace. It's pretty forgiving, especially at the lower baud rates. And really all that we need to make sure is that the data, once it gets to the destination, needs to be strong enough for the ECU or the PD to understand what that data is saying, right? And if we're not dropping packets and if the data is clean enough, then we're okay. But Jacob mentioned that testing tool. The Cypress testing tool takes all doubt out of this, and it will show you how much packet loss you have. Connect the two sides and run the test, and it says you drop 0 packets at all of these different baud rates, you're probably good to go reusing that Wiegand cable. So that's a nice way of doing that.
Yeah, I think that's when Cypress first posted that out on LinkedIn, I was very exuberant in responding to their post, because to me as an integrator, that's a game changer, because now we can, with more certainty, in the past, quoting a retrofit without replacing the cabling has always been a gamble. Now we can go out prior to issuing a quote and prior to actually doing any of the real work in the field and validate what our assumptions are, so we can A, be more accurate in our quoting, and B, reduce time troubleshooting if we're going to try to reuse the existing cabling. And that, again, faster, less expensive for us to deal with than having to gamble. So.
Yeah, I've said that I think every integrator or installer should have one of those kits. If you're installing OSDP, that should really be a vital tool to your success. Otherwise, you're guessing a little bit, like you're probably okay, but you're still guessing, and it could be a lot of rework and a lot of money that you never initially quoted, and it could just create challenges for you. And it's so inexpensive, the test tool. It's just another screwdriver, in my opinion. So,
yep.
Jacob, let's get to the heart of this. Secure channel keys. I think this is what we should be using. How are keys managed in secure channel? Who owns them? How do they store them? How do they protect them? Can you walk this through for us?
Yeah, and those are the key questions you need to ask. And as from an integrator perspective, I'm not an integrator, but if you're setting up a secure channel system, you need to ask the question, how are the keys managed? And it can be, top down, thought out, you have an answer for everything, or it can just be, hey, we're just going to set random keys and not keep track of it and deal with it in the future as it comes up. But either way, you need to have that plan going into the job so you know how you're managing it. And a lot of times that's, set by the customer demands, right? Is the customer wanting to hold on to the keys? Are you as the integrator holding on to the keys? Is there anyone else? Maybe a specific person of the company that is responsible for holding on to the keys. But you need to know you need to have a unique key for each PD on the lines. And so for each PD communication back with the ACU, there's a unique key. And then what policies are you going to have for keys? Do you get into, every 6 months or at least a year or maybe even more every quarter, you're going to go through and change those keys? Because if something happens, those keys get compromised. I mean, it's not likely, but it's just a pragmatic approach to it, right? To change those keys out every so often to minimize your risk. So yeah, what are the policies? Are your customers going to manage that? Are you going to manage that? Who's setting that up? But you need to have a plan. That's the most important part.
And Jacob, I guess I don't want to scare people into thinking that the only way of doing this is they have like this master list that they're writing down these crazy long encryption keys. A lot of times the access control software, the controller, it will automatically do this for you. But there could be situations and there could be a customer demand where they say, I want to own my keys and I want to own how I roll my keys and how often I do that and so forth. So just a good thing to, I think, ask and understand. Is it the controller and the software? Is it you who's doing this? And you're going in eyes wide open. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how do you deploy this in the field? And Mark, I'm going to go to you for this. What's the best practice for setting up a reader for secure channel and installing it on a wall?
So the ideal best practices, and this is where Sal mentioned earlier, is, that there have been a little chipping away at OSDP secure channel by the black hats. Part of that has to do with ideally you want to be doing all of this on a bench. It's similar to like, we used to not do this with readers, right? Because readers are not as smart. Like a Wiegand reader, you're going to plug it in. There's no address, nothing you have to set up on. Where it makes sense to do it on the workbench. One of the big reasons is because they start out in that open mode. So if you're doing it across field wiring where you don't necessarily know the end to end on it, there is a possibility somebody can snoop and attack and get keys, etc. So ideally you're doing this on the bench. You set up your equipment, you're plugging it in, and you're going to set the keys through. Usually it's the panel side and potentially card reader side where you're actually, it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, and to the point, some cases it's the access control software talking to the panel. So it'll even vary, like, Mercury ships to a billion different software companies, and every one of those is they're not all going to be different, but a lot of them might have different ways of setting keys. But doing it on the workbench allows you to verify it. You have a test card, make sure that you're getting the communications. If there's any kind of diagnostics that either the panel or the reader will give you, or the panel or the software can give you, you're able to view that while you're testing all of this and verify it. One of the key parts that we've found, because going back to that key management slide, and Jeremy, you're right on with the fact that some cases the software or panel manufacturers set that up for you. We have one of our software manufacturers or software companies that uses, if you buy the panels and readers from them, they are set to automatically negotiate those keys the first time you attach a reader to the port. So it becomes very important, just like, keeping track of camera IP addresses and everything on the video side, because now I'm dealing with a smarter technology. It's important to know what port your reader is on, because what we actually had happen in the past was literally where we had one of our field offices set all this up on a workbench in the office, take it out to the field, and they're wondering why it didn't work. And we get on with the manufacturer's tech support. It's like, well, yes, secure mode's on. I mean, the readers would spin up, but you put the card on it, no read, and there's not really a lot of diagnostic feedback. If they've had some of the, IDmachines or Cypress tools, they'd probably be able to do some of their diagnostics on their own. At the end of the day, though, we went back to the manufacturer and they're like, well, it's secure channel, so you either need to go in now and reset all the keys and have them renegotiate these because we've got it set up to automatically provide them, or you're going to need to go out and manually set the key on each end, or you're going to have to go and swap readers around until you figure out what readers on what port. So the bottom line of that story is, if I'm not doing a multi-drop and I'm not doing, is making sure that I have the right reader on the right port and documenting that so that when it's installed, you're not going to have this scramble of trying to match readers and ports and stuff. So, yeah. And then at the end, like it mentions, essentially the only time you're going to have a clear text setup is when it's in that install mode initially, and it negotiates that key. So.
Yeah, so the risk there and why we say it should be done on a bench is, since in the very beginning there is that clear text install mode option, there's the potential that somebody could sniff those wires between the reader on the wall by the door and the controller. They could install a device, capture the clear text, and then act like they were the controller, and they could do man in the middle, and then they could start sending bad information or unlocking doors or creating havoc for you. So in my opinion, I think installers, and I'm not an installer, but I think integrators do this on the video side. You set all your cameras up on a test bench, you set the IP addresses, you label them, you know where they're being installed. And this is really no different. You're setting your readers up with your controllers, you're getting them talking, you know where they're being installed, and then you go install them. And that eliminates somebody from grabbing clear text and causing problems for you in the future.
Yep. Exactly right.
So, Sal, we just talked about how each reader and controller pair, they get their own unique encryption key, their own secure channel keys. So let's say I need to reset a reader, I get a new reader, or I need to move that reader to a new location. What's my process for that?
Well, so it's the same as setting the base key to begin with. So yeah, and those are the sort of the next set of slides. And while we're at this, I'm going to hit a couple of the Q&A questions. So one of the Q&A questions was, is there a reason why OSDP is not secure by default? It's not secure by default because you need to set secure channel, which is what we're showing here, right? So, and if a reader is set in OSDP mode, it is effectively able to then be set in secure channel. So really the important thing is to set it in OSDP mode, not into Wiegand mode. And then if it's in OSDP mode, then go through the process that we're going to show here. The other question in the Q&A also was, what about the black hat presentation? And we've actually talked a couple of times about that already. Most of the things that the black hat presentation talked about was really kind of stupid stuff, right? It would be like setting the secure channel keys in an insecure location, right? So
turning secure channel on, right? Like, hey,
yeah.
OSDP isn't secure because you didn't turn secure channel on, and it's like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
no, duh, like, of course, yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's a basic profile where there's, and again, we've addressed that to say that we don't verify products that in the basic profile, and there are, and at the same, and the spec is evolving to make it more secure over time. I will point out that the AES encryption technique is actually post-quantum for what it's worth. So, so the black hats, black hat presentations like to create a little drama. Good for them for getting accepted and having created drama. The fact is the protocol is very solid and when properly deployed, is and has been protecting stuff all around the world, right? So, and And so what I'm going to show you, what you see on the screen now are actually OSDP traces, right? So the way the protocol works is that there's a command and a response, which are frames, right? So you can see an ACU frame and a PD frame. These traces are done with our IDOLA tool. There's also a Cypress trace tool. There's a product which is called OSDP Bench, which is a Windows tool, which is provided by Jonathan Horvath and CBIT. So there's plenty of tools out there that do this. One of the reasons why traces are important, I'd say there's two things, right? One is that you want to capture a trace of what a good startup looks like. So you basically have your base reference condition of when a system is coming up properly. And then if in fact there's something that's going wrong in the field, the best way to get technical support is to send them a trace. So what I'm going to do now is just sort of go through what a normal trace sequence looks like. So the first thing that you'll typically see is an ID command, and then the PD ID is the peripheral device response to the ID. And what it tells you is the OUI is the company, the model is the model, the serial number is the serial number, and the firmware is the build, right? So right there, you've got your as builds for the reader. And this is something that, if your access control system supports this and you need to know which devices are on which door in which location, you get that information automatically. So after doing an ID, the next thing that you get is a capabilities report. And this will tell you what the reader supports, whether it's one LED or tricolor LEDs, whether it supports a buzzer, whether it supports text. The important thing to look for here is entry 5, and the answer being 0101, which means it actually does truly support secure channel. And then besides that, there's other information, which is basically letting the ACU know the capabilities, the communications capabilities of the PD. So this next slide then actually goes through and shows you what setting secure channel looks like. So I'm going to move my screen along too so I can see it. So the way this works is that there is a standard default key. And so you start in clear text, and then you use the SCBK/D to set the initial secure channel condition, right? And then once you've done that, then you go through a process of actually setting a new key. And then that is where you can see the series of commands, which are ccrypt, scrypt, RMAC-I, that's what I've got in front of me here. And then in fact, then you've got secure channels operational, right? So at this point, so this is what you would do on the bench, right? So this is where you have a default key, you set the new key, you know that this reader is connected on this port at this door to this channel on this controller, and then you take it offline, right? And so then if you go to the next slide, you'll see setting the new secure channel key, which it says, okay, here's a key set, right? The key, you set the key with the key that you just set. So you've gone from setting it offline to putting it back online. You're now in clear text communications. You do a challenge because the reader knows what key is in it. And it's already there, and the controller knows what key, and these are the identical keys, right? It's symmetric cryptography, right? So it's the same key in the controller as it is in the reader. You do the challenge, and then secure channel communications up and running, and away you go, right? And so this just shows you what that trace would look like under normal circumstances. And then if for some reason, and if you go to the next slide, right, if for some reason you tried to do this with the wrong key, you basically would get a knack back that say, wait a minute, that's not the right key. That isn't the one that you set. That secure channel is not expected. I saw someone's raising their hands. Jimmy, if you got a question, if you could put it in chat, we'd be happy to take it there. So that's how you go about doing it, right? It's check for status, ID, capabilities, default key, new key, then key set and a challenge, and you're off and running. And then at some point you should rotate these. and when you rotate them, you basically do a new key set, right? So you don't have to take the reader offline at that point. You just do a key set with the new key, and then you reestablish communications in secure channel, right? There, you don't have to go back to the bench to update a key, and it's important for people to know that.
Right. So you already have that encrypted communication happening, and then you update your keys from there through that encryption.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So
okay,
yeah,
so Sal, in an interest of time, I'm gonna skip the next few slides. I'll say let's talk about OSDP Bootcamp, and then I want to answer a couple of questions, and then for the questions we don't get to, we'll I'll create some sort of document, maybe an Excel spreadsheet with the question, and we'll type an answer for everybody, so we get to everybody's question. But OSDP Bootcamp is important. Can you tell what this is?
yeah, so this is so the next boot camps at ISC West. If you go to Google OSDP Bootcamp on the CF site, there's the registration there. It's a full day session in which the beginning of it goes into a little bit more detail on what we've been talking about on this today, and you have time to spend a little bit more time interactively in questions and answers with really some of the leading experts in the field. So people like Rodney Thayer and Jonathan Horvath, who are I mean they're the people that people go to whenever they really want to do or implement OSDP. You've got them in a classroom setting. And you've got full-blown interaction all day long. There's about 3 hours in the morning in which you go through about 100 slides with all sorts of aspects and details around the protocol, much more detail than we've gotten into today. And then in the afternoon, there's a hands-on class in which there's OSDP pods with OSDP verified readers and controllers and I/O modules. And you can even bring your own OSDP devices, OSDP systems, and interact with them. There's exercises that you go through. You'll do things like you'll set secure channel, you'll capture a trace. You'll be able to figure out, some of the pods are set up where it's not working, and you get to do troubleshooting. There's a little Easter eggs there. And then you can, literally get hours and hours of multiple consulting time with the world's leading experts in this stuff. There's all sorts of testimonials about how people have benefited from the boot camps. Besides sort of IC West and East, there's also some regional ones, and people can also have these at their own facility if they're interested in. They can reach out to Sal at IDmachines or Sia, and we're happy to arrange that for you.
Awesome. I'm going to do one shameless plug, and it is nowhere near to the in-depth version of what Bootcamp is, but I have a YouTube channel called The Mercury Minute, and I walk through how this looks from the access control software. So we're not getting into the weeds and looking at lines of code and so forth like that, but or traces. But we'll see what it looks like in the access control platform, what you need to do at the reader to put something into install mode and get your initial secure channel keys to communicate and so forth. So there's a bunch of videos out there, the Mercury Minute. I just saw somebody, I got a new subscriber. It just popped up on my phone.
Excellent.
So,
Whoever Ricardo is, thanks for subscribing.
So
I
can hit a couple of questions quickly. So
perfect.
Max length for OSDP, the max length is 1440 bytes, but there's a multi-part message, so there really is no maximum length. It's what you can swallow in one byte, and you can take multiple bytes.
I'd like to also just say if they're meaning like the distance, it's 4,000 feet from reader to panel.
Oh, that's good point. Length. Yeah. Yes, but that's with proper wire and proper terminations.
Right, and the higher baud rate and the more you're doing with the feature sets and more data you're pushing through, the more required that specified OSDP cable is.
I'll say this, you're not running your power 4,000 feet because you'll have no power left at the end. So you're probably not running 4,000 feet in most situations, but technically you could.
Right.
Sal, there was a question, is the same key used for all the readers?
Yeah, no, we covered this, right? So every controller reader has a unique key pair. And even if you're doing multi-drop, right? So if all the readers are on one bus, they each have a unique address and they'll each have a unique key, right? So you'll have address 1, address 2, address 3, address 4, conceivably up to a big number, but really, you get beyond 16 or 32, that's probably the rational limit for this stuff. And a unique key but if you have multiple 485 ports, the same thing is true. It's a unique key pair, a unique pair of AES keys for each combination of controller to reader pair.
There was a question about the SCBC and the default key. Are they the same thing?
So the secure channel base key /D is the default key. The secure channel base key is the new key that's set. The default key is a standard key for everybody, which is why it's easy to do that. And you would never run encryption, even though you will see encrypted communications when you're using the default key, you never, ever, ever stay on that key. And this is the kind of thing that someone at Black Hat would say, well, if you stayed on the default key, then you're vulnerable because everybody knows the default key. Well, yeah, of course. It's only there for setting the base key. All right. And so they are different keys, they're different key materials, and that secure channel base key is unique for every controller reader key pair.
There's a question about Signal 40. Can you update a Signal 40 firmware over an MP1502 and MR52 in Genetec? So pretty specific. There are ways to update reader firmware on HID signal readers through the controller today. There's an extra piece of software, but there are ways.
I responded to the question in the chat on that one, and the answer is the Genetec software side doesn't communicate to the Mercury panel to do it. So if you use HID's link software, it's a separate component that runs in parallel with your Genetec. You can do the firmware updates and convert. It's within reason. There's certain things. It's still new,
Really?
but you can use the HID link software to connect to the Mercury controller and do some firmware updates and some configuration changes.
Yeah, which was my point tongue-in-cheek earlier about making sure that your access control software actually is capable of supporting OSDP. Yeah, for what it's worth, Genetec has not been OSDP verified. The other thing that you want to check there is to make sure that the downstream board, because you just said MR52, and there's an MR52 S3, there's MR52, there's MR52 S3, and there's now coming down MR52 S4. You want to make sure which of the MR boards that you've got there as well.
There's a few other questions, but they're probably longer answers, so we can follow up with those maybe directly to some of those. They're somewhat specific. So I really appreciate everybody sticking on to the presenters. Thank you for sharing such valuable information. I think this is important. If all things work, this should be recorded. We'll see if it worked. If it's recorded, I'll send a link out to everybody with that, and we'll send some of those other documents that we've put together that will help you understand this even further, so you'll have some takeaways. And look, if you guys have specific questions, Mark, Jacob, Sal, myself, we'll all be on the email, and we're glad to help you out. So reach out anytime you need something, and thank you all again. Hope you have a good day.